Welcome back to Dream Retro, where we drift back to simpler times and relive the moments that shaped us. Tonight, we're taking a journey together back to a place that existed in nearly every childhood, a magical kingdom where imagination lived on every shelf and dreams came wrapped in plastic and cardboard. So settle in, get comfortable, and prepare to return to a time when the sight of that backward R could make your heart race with excitement. Let's begin by going back to where it all started, long before any of us were born, to understand how a simple idea became the backdrop for millions of childhood memories. Take a deep breath, let yourself relax, and let's remember together. The story of Toys R Us begins in 1948 in Washington, D.C., with a man named Charles Lazarus. But the business didn't start with toys at all. Charles opened a baby furniture store. Sources vary on whether it was initially called Children's Supermart or Children's Bargain Town, but regardless of the exact name, the concept was the same: a place for baby furniture. He was only 25 years old, recently returned from World War II, and he had watched his father run a bicycle shop during the Great Depression. He understood retail, and he understood what families needed. In those post-war years, America was experiencing a baby boom. Young couples were starting families at unprecedented rates. The GI Bill had made home ownership possible for millions of veterans, and suddenly there were all these young parents in new suburban homes needing cribs and high chairs and all manner of baby furniture. Charles saw the opportunity and seized it. But something interesting happened in that baby furniture store. Parents would come in to buy a crib, and they'd ask if Charles carried toys. At first, he'd have to send them elsewhere. But he started noticing this pattern. The requests came again and again. And Charles Lazarus was a smart businessman. He realized that babies grow up. They need furniture for only so long, but they need toys for years. So Charles began stocking toys alongside the furniture. Just a few at first. Some rattles, some building blocks, perhaps a stuffed animal or two. But he quickly discovered something remarkable. The toys sold faster than the furniture, much faster. Parents were hungry for quality toys for their children, and in the late 1940s and early 1950s, there weren't many places to find them. You might get toys at a department store, but the selection was limited. You might find them at a five and dime, but the quality was inconsistent. By 1957, Charles had made a decision that would change retail history. He would focus entirely on toys. He opened a store in Rockville, Maryland, calling it Toys R Us. That backward R was deliberate. It was meant to look childlike, as if a kid had written it. From the very beginning, Charles understood something fundamental. Toys weren't just products, they were magic. They were childhood itself, packaged and sold. The concept was revolutionary for its time. Before Toys R Us, toy shopping was seasonal. Department stores would stock up heavily before Christmas, and parents would brave the crowds to find what they could. But Charles envisioned something different. A store dedicated year-round to toys, with a massive selection and competitive prices. He was creating not just a store, but a destination. In those early years, the stores were relatively modest by later standards, but the concept was sound. Charles operated on a simple philosophy: offer huge variety, keep prices low, and make the shopping experience exciting. He studied supermarkets, which were themselves a relatively new concept, revolutionizing how Americans bought groceries. He saw how they used shopping carts, how they displayed products, how they created a sense of abundance, and he thought, why not apply this to toys? The 1950s were a perfect time for this idea. Television was becoming commonplace in American homes, and with it came toy advertising. Children were seeing commercials for Barbie dolls, for Matchbox cars, for Mr. Potato Head. They were developing brand awareness and specific desires, and parents needed somewhere to fulfill those desires. Toys R Us became that somewhere. Charles Lazarus was building something that would outlast him. Though he couldn't have known it then, he was creating a place that would become woven into the fabric of American childhood for generations. A place where a simple shopping trip could feel like an adventure, where the automatic doors opening felt like the entrance to another world. Throughout the 1960s and 1970s, Toys R Us expanded steadily, refining its model with each new store. Charles Lazarus continued to innovate, and his supermarket approach to toy retail became increasingly sophisticated. The stores grew larger, the aisles multiplied. The selection became overwhelming in the best possible way. The layout of a Toys R Us was carefully designed, though it might not have seemed that way to a child wandering its aisles in wonder. Stores typically placed the most popular items, the hot toys of the season, near the front. This served multiple purposes. It created immediate excitement upon entering. It made it easy for parents on quick missions to grab what they needed, and it built anticipation for what else might be found deeper in the store. During these decades, the company pioneered several retail strategies that would become industry standard. They were among the first to use extensive computerized inventory systems, allowing them to track what was selling and restock accordingly. This was revolutionary in the 1970s. It meant that Toys R Us could respond to trends faster than competitors. If a particular action figure was flying off shelves, they could order more immediately. If a game wasn't selling, they could adjust. They also developed a unique relationship with toy manufacturers. Because Toys R Us was becoming such a large retailer, they had bargaining power. They could negotiate better prices, which they passed on to consumers. This made them fiercely competitive. A toy that might cost $10 at a department store could be found for $7 or $8 at Toys R Us. For families, this mattered tremendously. The stores became known for their warehouse aesthetic. High shelves reaching toward the ceiling, packed with colorful boxes, industrial-looking racks and fixtures, often concrete floors, though finishes varied by location. This wasn't an accident. The warehouse look served a purpose. It suggested abundance and value. It made customers feel like they were getting a deal, accessing wholesale prices. And it allowed the stores to display an enormous amount of inventory. By the end of the 1970s, Toys R Us had stores across the United States. The expansion was aggressive but calculated. They chose locations carefully, often in suburban areas where young families were settling. They'd open near shopping centers, but usually in standalone buildings with large parking lots. The stores were destinations in themselves, not just stops along a shopping trip. The staff during this era were trained to know their inventory. Walk into a Toys R Us in 1975, and you could ask an employee where to find a particular toy, and they'd generally be able to tell you the aisle and section. The employees were often young themselves, teenagers and college students, but they were knowledgeable. They had to be. The stores were vast, and customers needed guidance. The shopping experience had a particular rhythm. You'd enter through those doors, heavy glass doors that were manual in the early days, automatic later on. You'd grab a shopping cart, oversized and grey or red, and then you'd begin the journey. If you were a parent, you might have a list, but you knew it was aspirational. Your child would find things, would point and plead and negotiate. If you were a child yourself, perhaps there for a birthday shopping trip or a special reward, the possibilities seemed infinite. The 1970s also saw Toys R Us begin to understand the power of the holiday season even more deeply. They had always done well during Christmas, but they started to create event shopping experiences. They'd bring in extra staff. They'd extend hours. They'd create elaborate displays at the store entrances, Santa's workshop one year, a winter wonderland the next. The catalogue became important during this time too. The Toys R Us catalogue was thick, hundreds of pages, and it would arrive in mailboxes in late October or early November. Children would pore over it, dog-earing pages, circling items with markers. The catalogue wasn't just advertising, it was a dream book. It showed you everything that was possible, everything that existed in the toy universe. By 1978, Toys R Us had become so successful that it was purchased by interstate stores, though Charles Lazarus remained involved in operations. When Interstate filed for bankruptcy shortly after, Toys R Us emerged as the surviving entity, eventually going public in 1978. The company was now positioned for its greatest era of expansion. The 1970s laid the groundwork for what was to come. The systems were in place. The brand recognition was building. The model had proven itself sustainable and scalable. And America's children were growing up knowing that when they thought of toys, they thought of that giraffe mascot, that backward R, those warehouse stores packed floor to ceiling with possibility. The 1980s were when Toys R Us truly became a cultural phenomenon. This was the decade when the company expanded internationally, opening stores in Canada, the United Kingdom, Singapore, and eventually dozens of other countries. This was when the brand became synonymous with childhood itself, and this was when a generation of children formed memories that would last a lifetime. Geoffrey the Giraffe had been around since 1965, originally appearing as Dr. G-Raff in the 1950s for children's bargain town. He made his first television commercial appearance in 1973, but it was in 1982 that he got his most iconic accompaniment, the jingle created by James Patterson and Linda Kaplan Thaler at the J. Walter Thompson Advertising Agency. I don't want to grow up. I'm a Toys R Us kid. That song became embedded in the cultural consciousness. Adults today, decades later, can still sing it from memory. It captured something essential, the desire to remain in that magical space of childhood, where the biggest concern was which toy to choose. The stores themselves became larger and more elaborate during this decade. The typical Toys R Us of the 1980s was massive, often 40,000 square feet or more. Walking into one felt like entering a cathedral dedicated to play. The ceilings were high, the aisles were long, and everywhere you looked, there were toys. Toys stacked on shelves, toys hanging from pegboards, toys in glass cases for the especially expensive or collectible items. The 1980s were also a golden age for toys themselves. This was the era of Transformers, He-Man, G.I. Joe, My Little Pony, Care Bears, Cabbage Patch Kids, and Nintendo. The toy industry was booming, driven by Saturday morning cartoons that were essentially 30-minute advertisements for action figures and dolls, and Toys R Us was the primary place to find all of it. The Cabbage Patch Kids phenomenon of 1983 and 1984 is particularly memorable. These unique-looking dolls, each supposedly adopted rather than bought, became the must-have toy of the decade. Parents lined up outside Toys R Us stores in the early morning, hoping to snag one of the limited quantities available. There were news reports of fights breaking out, of parents camping overnight. Toys R Us was at the center of this cultural moment, and the stores handled it as well as anyone could handle mass hysteria. Video games became a major part of the Toys R Us experience during the 1980s. Initially, there were electronic handheld games, then Atari, and finally the Nintendo Entertainment System launched in 1985. The video game aisle became a destination within the destination. Games were often kept behind locked glass cases, and you'd have to ask an employee to get one for you. There was something thrilling about that, pointing to the game you wanted, watching the employee unlock the case, receiving the box in your hands like a precious artifact. The bicycle section was another highlight. Toys R Us sold bikes, and seeing them all lined up, BMX bikes, mountain bikes, tricycles for toddlers, was spectacular. Some stores assembled the bikes and hung them from the ceiling for display. Others had them lined up along the walls. Either way, it reinforced the store's identity as a place where every possible toy existed. The 1980s also saw Toys R Us master the art of the promotional tie-in. When a major movie came out, say E.T. or Ghostbusters or Batman, Toys R Us would have entire end caps and displays dedicated to merchandise. The stores became places where movies extended beyond the screen, where you could take home a piece of the magic. Shopping at Toys R Us during the 1980s followed certain rituals. For many families, it was a weekend activity. Saturday morning, after breakfast, a parent might announce, "Let's go to Toys R Us." The drive there was filled with anticipation. Children might be going for a specific purpose. A birthday was coming, or they'd earned a reward for good grades, or they might simply be going to look, knowing that looking was almost as fun as buying. Upon arrival, there were decisions to be made. Which aisle first? Do you head straight for your favorite type of toy? Or do you explore systematically? Do you grab a shopping cart even if you're not sure you're buying anything, just to have somewhere to place the items you want to examine more closely? The store had a particular sound during the 1980s. There was the squeaking of shopping cart wheels on concrete floors, the chatter of children and parents negotiating, the occasional announcement over the PA system about a sale or a special event, and always, from somewhere, the sound of toys themselves, electronic toys beeping, toys with sound effects that had been activated by curious hands. Employees wore distinctive uniforms, typically featuring the Toys R Us logo prominently. They were there to help, but part of the Toys R Us experience was exploration and discovery. Parents might ask where to find something specific, but children often preferred to wander, to discover, to be surprised by what they found around each corner. The checkout process was an experience in itself. The lanes were long, designed to handle the holiday rush. And there, in those final moments before leaving were the impulse buy items, small toys, candy, stickers, one last temptation before exiting the magical kingdom. By the end of the 1980s, Toys R Us was at its peak. The company was profitable, expanding, and beloved. Charles Lazarus's vision had been fully realized. He had created not just stores, but experiences, not just shopping trips, but memories. If the 1980s were the golden age, the 1990s were the culmination, the moment when Toys R Us reached its absolute cultural zenith. By 1990, there were Toys R Us stores in nearly every American suburb and in cities around the world. The company operated over 700 stores worldwide and was generating billions in revenue. But more than the numbers, the 1990s were when Toys R Us solidified its place in the collective memory of an entire generation. The stores of the 1990s had evolved. They were cleaner, brighter, more organized than their predecessors, while maintaining that signature warehouse aesthetic. The iconic star-spangled design became more prominent. Stars on the signage, stars on the shopping carts, stars on the employee name tags. Everything about the visual identity said, "This is a special place. This is where magic happens." The toy landscape of the 1990s was incredibly rich. This was the decade of Beanie Babies, Furby, Pokemon, Tamagotchi, Power Rangers, and more. It was when American Girl dolls became widely popular, when Lego sets became increasingly complex and themed, when board games experienced a renaissance, and Toys R Us had it all. The video game section expanded dramatically. By the mid-1990s, gaming had become a massive industry. Sony's PlayStation launched in 1995. Nintendo had the N64, and Sega had its systems. Toys R Us responded by creating elaborate video game departments. Some stores had demo stations where you could actually play games before buying them. You'd see clusters of kids gathered around these displays, controllers in hand taking turns, advising each other on strategies. The 1990s were also when Toys R Us stores began hosting events. They'd invite children to meet Santa Claus during the holidays. They'd have toy demonstrations. Someone from a toy company would come and show how the latest robot or game worked. Some stores hosted birthday party packages. The store was becoming more than retail. It was becoming community. The layout of a 1990s Toys R Us was typically organized by type. Action figures and boys' toys in one section, dolls and girls' toys in another. Then areas for board games, arts and crafts, outdoor toys, video games, bikes, and educational toys. There was usually a baby section too, maintaining that connection to Charles Lazarus's original store concept. And then there were the seasonal sections, Halloween costumes in October, pool toys and water guns in summer. Signage had improved significantly. Clear aisle markers hanging from the ceiling told you what you'd find where. But part of the fun was still just wandering, discovering things you didn't know existed. A child might go in looking for a particular action figure and leave having discovered an entire new toy line they'd never heard of. The prices varied wildly. You could find small toys for $2 or $3, perfect for a child's allowance. And you could find elaborate playsets costing hundreds of dollars, the kind that parents would buy only for major occasions. The range meant that everyone could find something within their budget. a child with $5 could still experience the joy of purchasing something at Toys R Us. The catalogue remained important throughout the 1990s, though it was beginning to compete with another source of toy information, the internet. As the decade progressed, and more families got computers and internet access, children could research toys online. But the catalogue still held a special place. It would arrive like clockwork before the holidays, and the ritual of going through it, page by page, remained beloved. The Toys R Us of the 1990s also became more sophisticated in its marketing. The company understood timing. They knew when to push particular toys. As soon as school started in late August or September, there would be prominent displays of educational toys. As Halloween approached, costumes took center stage. After Halloween, immediately, the Christmas transformation would begin. The Christmas season was when Toys R Us truly came alive. The stores would be decorated with the lights and garlands. There would be a giant Christmas tree near the entrance, often with wrapped empty boxes beneath it, suggesting abundance. The PA system would play holiday music, and the crowd would be intense. Parents with determined expressions pushing carts, children wide-eyed and overwhelmed by choice. Working at Toys R Us during the 1990s was its own experience. For many teenagers, it was a first job. You'd wear the uniform, learn the inventory system, help customers find things, restock shelves, work the register. During the holiday rush, you might work long hours, but there was a certain energy to it. You were part of something. You were helping create those childhood memories, even if you were just pointing someone toward aisle 7. The 1990s were also when Toys R Us faced its first real competition. Walmart and Target were expanding their toy sections. These retailers couldn't match the selection, but they offered convenience. Parents could buy toys while also buying groceries and household items. Toys R Us adapted by emphasizing what made it special: the sheer overwhelming abundance, the expertise, the focus. This wasn't just a toy aisle in a general retailer. This was a universe unto itself. By the end of the 1990s, Toys R Us was still thriving, but there were signs of coming challenges. Online shopping was beginning. Amazon had launched in 1995 and was starting to sell toys. The company would need to evolve. But in the moment, in the late 1990s, Toys R Us was still the undisputed king of toy retail. It was still where childhood dreams were bought and sold. And for the children of the 1990s, it remained magical. The memory of walking those aisles, of the overwhelming choice, of the bright colors and the possibilities, that memory would stay with them into adulthood. Years later, they would remember. They would tell their own children about it. And they would feel a pang of nostalgia for a time when the world seemed simpler, when happiness could be found in a toy store, when the backward R meant magic. To truly understand Toys R Us, to capture what made it special, we need to see it as a child saw it. Because from a child's perspective, this wasn't just a store, it was something more, something almost holy, a temple of joy. Imagine you're 7 years old. It's a Saturday afternoon in 1992. Your parents have told you that you can pick out one toy. Maybe it's your birthday next week, or maybe you've been especially good, or maybe your parents just feel generous. The reason doesn't matter. What matters is that you're going to Toys R Us, and you get to choose something. The drive there feels eternal. You're in the back seat, watching the familiar landmarks pass by. You know the route. You've made this trip before, and each time, the anticipation is the same. You might be clutching a few crumpled dollar bills of your own, allowance money, thinking about what you could add to your purchase with that. Then you see it, the building, that distinctive architecture, the big sign with the backward R and those primary colors. Your heart actually speeds up a little. You're really here. The car pulls into the parking lot, finds a space. Your parent unbuckles their seatbelt, gathers their things, but you're already ready, already reaching for the door handle. The walk from the car to the entrance is purposeful. You're not running exactly. Your parent has told you not to run in parking lots, but you're walking with determination. And then the automatic doors whoosh open and you step inside, and the full reality of it hits you. The scale, that's the first thing. The store is enormous. The ceilings are so high they almost disappear. The aisles stretch away from you in every direction like corridors in a maze. And everywhere, there are toys. The air has a particular smell. It's a mixture of new plastic, cardboard, and something else. Maybe it's just the industrial ventilation, or maybe it's something more ineffable. But it's a smell that you'll remember decades later. If you were to smell it again, even in a different context entirely, you'd immediately think, Toys R Us. Your parent might try to guide you. Let's think about what you want before we just wander. But you're already moving. You head toward your favorite section. Maybe it's the action figure aisle. Maybe it's the dolls. Maybe it's the aisle with all the Lego sets. Let's say you're a fan of action figures. You navigate there. You know the way by heart. And then you're standing in front of this wall of possibilities. There are dozens of different toy lines. There are the TV show characters, the movie characters, the original creations. Some of the figures are small, 3 or 4 inches tall, affordable. Others are larger, more expensive, packed with accessories. You stand there, looking, comparing. This is serious business. You can only choose one, so it has to be right. You pick up boxes, examining them. You read the back, where it shows all the other figures in the series. You notice which ones you already have at home and which ones would be new. Other children are in the aisle too, engaged in similar deliberation. You might exchange glances, might even comment to each other about particular toys. There's a camaraderie here. You're all on the same mission. Your parent is patient, but you can sense their attention wandering. They're looking at their watch. They're thinking about the other errands they need to run. But you need time. This decision matters. Maybe you venture to other aisles just to see what else is available. You walk past the video games, pausing to look at the colorful box art. You pass the board games, stacked high. You see the elaborate playsets, the ones that cost $100 or more, and you dream briefly about having one, knowing it's not in the budget today. Then perhaps you see something you hadn't expected, a toy from a line you'd forgotten about, or maybe something completely new, something you've never seen advertised on TV. This is the magic of exploration. The store holds surprises. You circle back to the action figures. You've made your decision. You know which one you want. You take it off the shelf, holding it carefully. This is your choice, your treasure. The walk to the front registers feels different now. You have what you came for. You're clutching the box, not wanting to drop it. not willing to put it in the cart where it might get damaged. Your parent might grab a few other things, maybe a birthday card for someone, maybe a small toy they'll save for another occasion, but your focus is on your prize. The checkout line might be long, it often is, but you don't mind. You're studying your toy through the plastic window in the box. You're reading the back again. You're planning how you'll play with it once you get home. The wait is part of the ritual. Finally, you reach the register. The employee scans the item. Your parent pays. The toy is placed in a bag, a plastic Toys R Us bag with the colourful logo. And then you're leaving, walking back out through those automatic doors into the sunlight. In the car on the way home, you might ask if you can open it now. Your parent might say yes, or might say to wait until you get home. If you wait, those minutes feel like hours. If they let you open it in the car, you carefully work at the tape, trying not to rip the box too much because you want to save it. And once you have it open, once the toy is in your hands, free from its plastic prison, you examine every detail. You bend the joints. You attach the accessories. You imagine the adventures it will have. That night, the new toy takes its place among your other toys. And before you fall asleep, you might think about Toys R Us, about the aisles you didn't explore this time, about the toys you saw but didn't choose, about when you might get to go back, because you will go back. Toys R Us isn't a one-time experience. It's a recurring joy, a known quantity, a place that will be there for your next birthday, for Christmas, for the next time you've earned a reward. It's a constant in a changing world. This is what Toys R Us meant from a child's perspective. It wasn't about commerce or retail strategy or market share. It was about possibility. It was about choice. It was about the pure, undiluted joy of play. It was one of the few places in a child's life where they had real power, where their opinion mattered supremely, where they could make a decision that affected their happiness. And the memory of that feeling, that sense of wonder, that anticipation, that satisfaction, would stay with you for the rest of your life. There's something about Toys R Us that transcends the simple facts of its existence. Yes, it was a store. Yes, it sold products. But for those who experienced it, it existed in a realm beyond pure commerce. It existed in memory, in feeling, in the architecture of childhood itself. Close your eyes for a moment and remember, not just the store, but the feeling of being there, the sensations. Because Toys R Us was a full sensory experience, and each sense carries its own weight of memory. First, sight. The colors were overwhelming. Bright primary colors on every package, every box, every display. The action figure aisle was a riot of blues and reds and greens. The doll aisle often featured pinks and purples, though not exclusively. The video game section had those distinctive box designs, each competing for attention. And then there were the larger displays, cardboard standees of popular characters, promotional posters, shelf talkers announcing sales or new arrivals. The visual overstimulation was part of the appeal. Your eyes didn't know where to land. There was too much to see. You could visit weekly and still discover something you'd never noticed before. A toy tucked into a corner. A shelf you'd somehow previously overlooked. The sheer density of visual information meant that the store never became familiar in the way other places did. It remained always slightly mysterious. The lighting was bright, fluorescent, functional. This wasn't mood lighting. This was illumination, designed to help you see products clearly, to make colors pop, to ensure that nothing was hidden in shadow. It was warehouse lighting because it was, essentially, a warehouse. But there was something honest about that. The store didn't pretend to be anything other than what it was, a massive space filled with toys, presented without artifice or pretension. Sound created its own landscape. The ambient noise of Toys R Us was distinctive. There was the mechanical sound of shopping carts, the rattle of wheels on concrete, the occasional squeak. There was the PA system, which might play music or might broadcast announcements. There were the sounds of other shoppers, children's voices, parents negotiating, babies crying in carts. And then there were the toys themselves. Electronic toys would often go off. Someone would push a button on a display model, activating sounds. You'd hear snatches of melodies, beeps and boops, recorded phrases. "I'm Tickle Me Elmo," a doll might suddenly announce from 3 aisles over. These sounds created an almost musical backdrop, a symphony of plastic and electronics. During busy times, weekends, holidays, the sound level would increase. The store would feel alive with human energy. During quieter times, weekday afternoons, the sound became more intimate. You could hear your own footsteps. The store felt more explorable, less chaotic. The sense of touch was crucial at Toys R Us. This was a place where you were encouraged to interact with products, at least to some degree. Display models existed specifically to be handled. You could pick up a toy, feel its weight, test its features. For children, this was important. Toys are meant to be played with, and even the act of holding a boxed toy, of feeling its heft, was part of the decision-making process. The texture of the place itself was interesting. The floors were hard, industrial. The shelves were metal or plastic, utilitarian. The shopping carts had that cold metal feel. But the toys themselves were varied. Smooth plastic, soft plush, textured rubber. The contrast between the hard industrial setting and the playful textures of the products was part of the store's character. Smell is perhaps the most evocative sense, the one most tied to memory. And Toys R Us had a smell. It wasn't necessarily a pleasant smell in the traditional sense. It wasn't perfumed or carefully curated. It was the smell of new plastic, fresh from factories. It was the smell of cardboard, of packaging. There might have been a hint of rubber from the bike tires. During the holidays, there might have been the smell of seasonal items, scented markers, Play-Doh, that distinct crayon smell from the arts and crafts section. But underneath all that was something else. It was the smell of industrial HVAC systems, of concrete floors, of commercial space. It was, in its way, a smell of possibility, because that smell meant you were there, in that specific place, where anything could be bought, where any toy could be yours. The sense of taste didn't play a large role at Toys R Us, but it was present in small ways. Maybe your parent bought you a candy from the checkout lane as a treat. Maybe you had gum in your mouth while shopping. Maybe you'd stopped for fast food on the way and could still taste it. These small taste memories intertwine with the larger experience, creating a fuller picture. But beyond the 5 senses, there was another sense at work in Toys R Us, an emotional sense, a sense of wonder and possibility. This is harder to describe, but no less real. It was the feeling of your heart beating a little faster when you walked through those doors, It was the flutter of excitement in your stomach when you thought about what you might find. It was the satisfaction of making a choice, of claiming something as yours. There was also the geography of the store, the way you navigated it. Children developed mental maps of their local Toys R Us. They knew which aisle held what. They knew shortcuts. They knew which end caps usually had the good stuff. This spatial knowledge was a form of mastery, a way of feeling competent in an adult-sized world. The store existed in time as well as space. There was the time of year. The store felt different in December than in July. There was the time of day. Morning visits were quieter than afternoon ones. There was the time in your own life. Visiting as a young child felt different than visiting as a preteen, which felt different than visiting as a teenager shopping for a younger sibling. Some people have specific, vivid memories. They remember the exact toy they bought on a specific visit. They remember what they wore. They remember who they were with. These crystallized memories shine clearly across decades. Others have more general memories, an amalgamated sense of all the visits blended together. They remember the feeling more than specific incidents. Both types of memory are valid. Both speak to the impact of the place. For some, Toys R Us was tied to positive family memories. Shopping there with a grandparent who was generous, who let you pick out something special. Going with a parent after they'd had a good day at work. These became treasured memories, not just of toys, but of relationships, of time spent together. For others, there might be bittersweet memories. Perhaps you remember desperately wanting something you couldn't have, the disappointment of being told no. Perhaps you remember the tension of holiday shopping, parents stressed about money. But even these harder memories are part of the emotional landscape. They remind us that childhood wasn't always easy, that wanting things we couldn't have was part of growing up. The store also existed in the imagination. Children would think about Toys R Us when they weren't there. They'd plan future visits in their minds. They'd imagine having unlimited money, being able to buy anything they wanted. These daydreams were part of the experience, extending the joy of the store beyond its physical walls. And there was the anticipation, knowing you'd be going to Toys R Us soon, maybe next weekend, maybe for your birthday, created a sustained sense of happy expectation. You'd think about what you might get. You'd make mental lists. You'd change your mind multiple times. The anticipation was itself a gift, a way of being happy about something that hadn't happened yet. The emotional landscape of Toys R Us was complex and deeply personal. For millions of people, it represented something fundamental about childhood, the experience of desire, choice, and fulfillment. It was a place where you could be yourself, where your interests were taken seriously, where the adult world bent, however briefly, to accommodate your dreams. Around Toys R Us, a whole culture developed. Unspoken rules, shared rituals, common experiences that connected millions of people who never met, but who understood each other perfectly, because they'd all been there. They'd all participated in the same traditions. There was the birthday ritual. For many children, a trip to Toys R Us was an annual birthday event. Some families had a tradition. On your birthday, you could pick out one toy of your choice within reason. The phrase "within reason" meant different things to different families, but generally, it meant not the most expensive item in the store, but something substantial, something meaningful. The birthday shopping trip often happened a few days before the actual birthday, or sometimes after. when birthday money from relatives had been collected. You'd walk into the store knowing you had, say, $30 or $50 to spend. This was real decision-making power. You could get one expensive thing or multiple cheaper things. The strategic considerations were genuine. Some children would spend hours deciding. They'd walk the aisles multiple times, comparing options, calculating prices in their heads, trying to maximize their satisfaction. Others knew exactly what they wanted before they arrived and made a beeline for it. Both approaches were valid. Both were respected. Then there was the Christmas list ritual. Starting in October or November, children would begin compiling their Christmas lists, often by going to Toys R Us and walking the aisles with a parent, pointing out items. Some families would bring paper and pen, actually writing down the names and prices of desired toys. Others just made mental notes. The Christmas list expedition was different from a buying trip. There was less pressure because you weren't making final decisions. You could dream bigger. You could want things you probably wouldn't get. The list was aspirational, a wish list in the truest sense. Some families had the catalogue ritual instead. The big Toys R Us catalogue would arrive in the mail, and children would go through it with the markers or pen, circling items, dog-earing pages. Parents would use these marked-up catalogues as guides for their own shopping. The catalogue became a negotiating document, a reference text, a dream book. There was the just-looking visit. Sometimes families would go to Toys R Us without any intention of buying anything. This might seem pointless, but it wasn't. Looking was its own pleasure. You could see what was new. You could play with display models. You could window shop in the most literal sense. You were shopping, but only with your eyes and imagination. Children understood the difference between a just-looking trip and a maybe buying something trip. Your parent would make it clear from the beginning, we're just looking today. And you'd adjust your expectations accordingly. You might still ask for things. Can I have this for my birthday? But you knew you weren't leaving with anything today. There was the spontaneous reward ritual. Sometimes, unexpectedly, a parent would say, "You've been really good lately. Let's go to Toys R Us, and you can pick out something small." The key word was small. This meant something under $10 usually. But the spontaneity of it, the unexpected gift, made it special, even if the toy itself was minor. There were the school year rituals. Back to school meant getting supplies, and while Toys R Us wasn't primarily a school supply store, they did carry some items. Cool pencil cases, fun notebooks, character-themed supplies. Some families incorporated a Toys R Us stop into their back-to-school shopping. Report card rewards were another ritual. Good grades might earn a trip to Toys R Us. An A on a difficult test might be worth a small toy. The store became intertwined with achievement and positive reinforcement. There were seasonal rituals beyond Christmas. Summer meant outdoor toys, water guns, pool toys, sports equipment. Some families had a tradition of starting summer with a Toys R Us trip to pick out something for those long vacation days. Fall meant Halloween costumes. Toys R Us had a whole section dedicated to costumes every October, and choosing your Halloween costume there was its own event. The store also featured in friendship rituals. Birthday parties often meant that the birthday child received gifts, and those gifts often came from Toys R Us. There was a circuit. You'd go to a friend's party. You'd need a gift. You'd go to Toys R Us to buy one. This meant you'd spend time in the store thinking about what your friend would like, not what you wanted. This was training in empathy and consideration. Some children developed superstitions or habits around Toys R Us. Maybe you always entered through the same door if there were multiple entrances. Maybe you always visited your favorite aisle first. Maybe you had a lucky shopping cart. These small personal rituals added meaning to the experience. There was the parent behavior that children learn to read. You'd observe your parents' body language, their tone of voice, their responses. You'd learn to gauge how likely it was that they'd say yes to something based on subtle cues. You develop negotiating strategies. This was education in human behavior, in persuasion, in reading situations. The store also played a role in sibling dynamics. If you had siblings, shopping at Toys R Us became more complex. If one sibling got something, did the other deserve something too? Families had different rules. Some insisted on absolute equality. If one child got a toy, the other got one of equal value. Others were more flexible, understanding that different occasions meant different rules. Siblings might negotiate with each other. If I let you pick the game we play today, will you help me convince Mum to buy this? The store became a space where sibling relationships played out, where alliances were formed and deals were struck. There was also the phenomenon of the Toys R Us regular. Some families went so often that the employees recognized them. This created a sense of community. You'd see the same employee multiple visits in a row, and there might be a nod of recognition, a friendly greeting. For a child, being recognized as a regular at Toys R Us felt like being part of an exclusive club. The culture around Toys R Us extended beyond the store itself. At school, children would talk about what they got at Toys R Us. The store became a common reference point. "Did you see that new toy at Toys R Us?" was a conversation starter. Knowing what was available at Toys R Us was a form of social currency. The distinctive shopping bags became status symbols of a sort. Carrying a Toys R Us bag meant you'd been there. You'd gotten something. The bag itself was evidence of the experience. Some children would keep the bags, use them for other purposes, not wanting to throw away that tangible connection to the store. All of these rituals and cultural elements added up to something larger than the sum of their parts. Toys R Us wasn't just accommodating consumer behavior, it was helping to create childhood itself, giving structure to growing up, providing markers and memories that would endure long after the specific toys were forgotten or broken or given away. The 2000s brought changes that would ultimately prove existential for Toys R Us, though at the time, the shifts might have seemed manageable, even temporary. The company faced challenges from multiple directions, and while it adapted in some ways, it struggled to fundamentally transform its model for a new era. The first major challenge was the rise of big box retailers expanding their toy sections. Walmart and Target had always sold toys, but in the 2000s, they became more aggressive. They offered lower prices by selling toys as loss leaders. They could afford to make little or no profit on toys because customers would also buy groceries, clothing, and home goods while they were there. Toys R Us couldn't compete on that front. They only sold toys and related items. The second challenge was the internet, online shopping exploded during the 2000s. Amazon, in particular, became dominant. The advantages of online shopping were significant. You could compare prices easily, read reviews, have items delivered to your door. You didn't have to drive anywhere, park, navigate crowds. For busy parents, this convenience was compelling. Toys R Us tried to compete online. They launched their own e-commerce site. For a while, they even partnered with Amazon, which seemed logical at the time, but in retrospect helped strengthen a competitor. The company struggled to integrate its online and physical presences effectively. The magic that worked in a physical store didn't translate to a website. There was also the issue of changing play patterns. Children were spending more time with screens, computers, gaming consoles, smartphones, and tablets. Traditional toys weren't obsolete, but they faced more competition for children's attention and parents' money. A parent might think, should I buy my child a toy, or should I save that money for a new gaming device? In 2005, Toys R Us was taken private in a leveraged buyout by a group of investment firms, including KKR, Bain Capital, and Vornado Realty Trust. The deal loaded the company with debt, over $5 billion. This debt became a crushing burden. Instead of being able to invest in store improvements, in technology, in adapting to changing markets, Toys R Us had to service massive debt payments. The stores began to show their age. Where once the warehouse aesthetic had felt authentic and fun, it increasingly felt dated and tired. Stores that had been built in the 1980s and 1990s weren't being renovated significantly. The floors were worn, the shelves looked old. The overall experience started to feel less magical and more mundane. Customer service became inconsistent. The knowledgeable staff of earlier decades were harder to find. The company cut labor costs, meaning fewer employees on the floor to help customers. The stores could feel understaffed, especially during busy periods. It was harder to find someone to ask a question, harder to get assistance. Some stores tried to innovate. A few locations added FAO Schwarz boutique sections after Toys R Us acquired that brand. Some stores created elaborate Disney store sections. There were experiments with interactive displays and demonstrations, but these felt like patches on a larger problem. The fundamental model was struggling. The company also made strategic errors. They were slow to embrace mobile commerce. Their website was clunky compared to Amazon's. Their inventory management, once a source of competitive advantage, hadn't kept pace with technological advances. Sometimes items shown as available online weren't actually in stock. Sometimes stores ran out of hot toys during the holidays. Yet through all of this, Toys R Us remained beloved by many customers. Families continued to visit. The store still had magic for children who were experiencing them for the first time. A 5-year-old in 2010 could still feel that same wonder that a 5-year-old had felt in 1990. The problem wasn't that the magic had entirely disappeared. The problem was that the business model couldn't sustain itself in a changed retail environment while carrying billions in debt. The 2000s continued the downward trend. More store closures were announced. There were attempts at reinvention. Some stores tried to become more experiential, adding play areas where children could test toys. There was talk of creating smaller format stores, of finding new strategies. But the debt burden made it nearly impossible to execute any vision effectively. The company filed for bankruptcy in September 2017, announcing it would try to reorganize. There was hope initially that this might allow Toys R Us to shed its debt and emerge stronger. But the 2017 holiday season was disastrous. Suppliers, worried about the bankruptcy, were reluctant to extend normal credit terms. Customers, hearing about financial troubles, shifted their shopping elsewhere. The stores were still open, but it felt like visiting a place that was slowly dying. In March 2018, the company announced it would liquidate its US operations and close all stores. The news hit hard. People who had grown up with Toys R Us felt genuine grief. This wasn't just a store closing. It felt like a piece of childhood dying. The liquidation process was grim. The stores held going out of business sales. Everything was discounted, but there was no joy in it. The shelves grew emptier. The once abundant selection dwindled. The stores looked picked over, depleted. Employees, many of whom had worked there for years, faced unemployment. By summer 2018, the last US stores closed their doors. Geoffrey the Giraffe appeared in commercials that felt like eulogies. The company's social media accounts posted thank you messages to customers. It was the end of an era. But the story didn't quite end there. In 2019, a new entity calling itself Toys R Us emerged, backed by new investors. They opened a few small experiential stores, tried to relaunch online, but it wasn't the same. The new stores were tiny compared to the warehouses of old. They felt more like gift shops than destinations. The magic was gone, or at least drastically diminished. The real Toys R Us, the one that had defined toy retail for decades, was gone. What remained was something else, trading on a familiar name, but unable to recapture what had been lost. The closing of Toys R Us stores in 2018 created an unexpected phenomenon: pilgrimage. As stores announced their closing dates, people came to visit one last time. Adults who hadn't been to Toys R Us in years felt compelled to go. Parents brought their children, wanting them to experience it before it was too late. There was a quality of bearing witness, of saying goodbye. Walking into a Toys R Us during the liquidation period was surreal. The sales signs were everywhere, bright yellow tags announcing discounts. The shelves were disorganized, picked over. Popular items were long gone. What remained were the odds and ends, the toys nobody wanted, marked down again and again. But the bones of the place were still there. The layout was the same. The signage, though perhaps shabby, was familiar. You could still feel the ghost of what it had been. Some people took photos, documenting these final days. Others just walked the aisles quietly, remembering. The emotional response was significant. Social media filled with nostalgic posts. People shared their Toys R Us memories, their first visit, their favorite toys, the role the store had played in their childhoods. There were think pieces about what the closure meant for retail, for childhood, for American culture. Some of the grief was about more than just a store closing. Toys R Us had existed during a particular era, an analog era, a pre-internet era, a time when childhood felt different. The store's closing symbolized how much had changed. It was a marker of time passing, of childhoods that couldn't be reclaimed, of a world that had moved on. The employees faced difficult circumstances. Many had worked at Toys R Us for years, even decades. It had been more than a job. It had been part of their identity. The company initially offered minimal severance. There were protests, petitions asking the private equity firms that had owned the company to provide better compensation. Eventually, there was a hardship fund created, though many felt it was inadequate. For the communities where stores closed, there was a hole left behind. The buildings sat empty. Some were eventually filled by other retailers, but many remained vacant for years. Driving past an empty Toys R Us building was melancholy, the distinctive architecture recognizable but purposeless now. The legacy of Toys R Us is complex. On one level, it's a cautionary business tale about debt, disruption, and failure to adapt. The company made mistakes. It was hampered by debt from the leveraged buyout. It didn't transition effectively to e-commerce. It couldn't compete with retailers who could use toys as loss leaders. But on another level, the legacy is deeply personal and positive. For millions of people, Toys R Us provided genuine joy. It created memories that lasted lifetimes. It gave structure to childhood, birthday traditions, Christmas rituals, reward systems. It was a place where children felt powerful, where their opinions mattered, where the adult world accommodated their desires. The store helped shape consumer culture, pioneering the big box retail format for specialty goods. It proved that you could build a business around a single category, toys, and make it work at massive scale. Other retailers learned from Toys R Us, even as they eventually outcompeted it. Culturally, Toys R Us became embedded in the collective memory. References to it appear in movies, TV shows, music. The jingle, "I don't want to grow up, I'm a Toys R Us kid," remains instantly recognizable decades after it was written. The backward R is iconic, a piece of design history. The store also reflected and reinforced certain aspects of American childhood: the abundance, the consumerism, the focus on individual choice. These were very American values, for better or worse. Toys R Us was capitalism aimed at children, but it was also a place that genuinely tried to make children happy. There's something poignant about the fact that the store's slogan was, "I don't want to grow up," because ultimately, everyone does grow up. The children who shopped at Toys R Us in the 1980s and 1990s became adults. They had their own children. Some brought those children to Toys R Us, hoping to pass on the magic. But time doesn't stop. The world changes. Even the things that seem permanent eventually disappear. The closure of Toys R Us came during a broader retail apocalypse. Many stores were closing, victims of e-commerce and changing consumer habits. But Toys R Us felt different. It hurt more, because it wasn't just retail. It was childhood itself, or at least a symbol of it. In the years since the closures, there have been occasional attempts to revive the brand. The small experiential stores that opened, pop-up shops during holidays, an online presence that tries to recapture something. But these efforts feel incomplete. They can't recreate the experience of walking into that vast warehouse, of being overwhelmed by choice, of spending an hour just looking, just dreaming. What remains strongest is memory. Adults who grew up with Toys R Us carry it with them. They remember the birthday trips, the Christmas shopping, the smell of new plastic, the sound of shopping cartwheels on concrete. They remember specific toys they bought, specific visits that stood out, and they tell these stories to their own children, to each other. The stories keep the spirit of Toys R Us alive, even though most of the stores are gone. The stories say, this is what it was like, this is what we had, this is what made us happy. There's no bringing it back, not really. The retail environment that supported Toys R Us doesn't exist anymore. Shopping habits have fundamentally changed. Children today grow up differently, with different expectations and different sources of joy. That's not bad. It's just different. Every generation has its own version of childhood. But for those who experienced it, Toys R Us will always exist in memory. Perfect and complete. The aisles endless, the selection infinite, the possibilities boundless. A place where you could be yourself, where you could dream, where you could, for a moment, have exactly what you wanted. And so, we come to the end of our journey down memory lane, back to Toys R Us. The store that was more than a store. The place that held childhood itself on its shelves. As you lie here now, comfortable and relaxed, perhaps you've been remembering your own experiences, your own visits, the toys you wanted, the ones you got, the feeling of walking those aisles, of making choices, of being a child in a place built for children. Or perhaps Toys R Us wasn't part of your childhood. Perhaps you grew up in a different time or place, or perhaps your family shopped elsewhere. But the story still resonates because it's really about more than one store. It's about having places that matter, places that shape us, places that become part of our personal history. We all have places like this, places that existed in our childhoods and maybe don't exist anymore, or places that still exist but have changed, or that we've changed in relation to. These places live in our memories, perfect and permanent, even as the physical locations disappear or transform. There's something beautiful about this, about the way memory preserves things, the way a store that's been closed for years can still feel real and present when we remember it, the way we can close our eyes and be there again, be that age again, feel those feelings again. Toys R Us gave millions of people happy memories. That's no small thing. In a world that can be difficult, that can be painful, having reservoirs of joy to draw on matters. Remembering times when we were happy, when we were excited, when we were full of wonder. This nourishes us. As you drift towards sleep tonight, you might think about the places that mattered to you, the locations that shaped your growing up. They might be stores like Toys R Us. They might be parks or schools or friends' houses or grandparents' homes. Each of us has our own geography of childhood, our own map of meaningful places. These places live on in us. We carry them forward, and sometimes, in quiet moments like this, we can visit them again. Not physically, but in memory, which is its own kind of reality. The story of Toys R Us is the story of joy and change, of childhood and growing up, of things that last and things that end. It's a story that belongs to many people, but also to each person individually. Your Toys R Us memories are yours alone, unique and personal, even as they're shared by millions. As you settle deeper into rest, let those memories be gentle with you. Let them remind you of who you were, of what brought you happiness, of the simple pleasures of being young and wanting things and sometimes getting them. The store may be gone, but the joy it created remains. The memories remain. The child you were remains, somewhere inside you, still capable of wonder, still able to feel excited about possibilities, still able to imagine. And perhaps that's the real magic. Not the toys themselves, not the store, but the capacity for joy that they represented. That capacity doesn't disappear just because we grow up. It's still there, waiting to be remembered and rekindled. Sleep well, dream peacefully, and remember, in the gentle way that memory works, the good times, the happy places, the moments when you were exactly where you wanted to be, surrounded by exactly what you loved. Good night, and thank you for remembering with me.